Hey, it's your friend Josie here from the Speaking in Church podcast, where we talk all things deconstruction, pop culture, and, well, Jesus. You're currently listening to an irreverent podcast, and guess what? We're an irreverent podcast too. So tune in to the Speaking in Church podcast, where we talk to regular people about regular things that regularly happen to us in the evangelical church, and we bitch about it. Join us. If you want to come on, you can always let us know.
You're listening to an irreverent podcast. Visit irreverent.fm for more content from our amazing lineup of creators. Welcome to Straight White American Jesus. My name is Brad Onishi. Our show's hosted in partnership with the CAP Center at UCSB. I'm joined today by somebody who was just here and has just so kindly agreed to come back, and that is Dr. Megan Goodwin. So, Dr. Goodwin, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me back and for giving me yet another opportunity to just shout into the void about Satan, which is one of my favorite pastimes.
When people are like, why become a scholar of religion? It's like you yell into the void about Satan. That's an amazing life.
I was just shushed on an airplane for doing exactly that.
Oh, I saw that tweet.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. Hey, well, whatever. Okay. Well, I'm not going to shush you. I'm going to just let you roll. But before that, let me tell everybody all the amazing stuff you do. You teach at Northeastern University in Boston. You are the co-host of Keeping It 101, which we talked about last time, is an amazing podcast that introduces people to the study of religion. You are the director of the Sacred Rights Program, which is a program that helps train scholars for public scholarship, something near and dear to our heart here at Straight White American Jesus, and the author of Abusing Religion, Literary Persecution, Sex Scandals, and American Minority Religions, out from Rutgers University Press. And we talked about it last time. We're going to talk about it again. So, last time we talked about contraceptive nationalism and the Catholicization of our public morality and these kinds of things. Today, we're going to talk about something else, and that is the Satanic Panic. And so let me just ask you, you know, in the book, there's a great chapter on this, folks. If you have not got the book yet, go get it, because in the book, you really start us off with some kind of, some sort of, I don't know what they are, facts or sort of quick little nuggets about the Satanic Panic. So before I even tell people or have you tell people the Satanic Panic, before we even get into like, what is it? When did it take place, and what kind of resources were put into investigating it?
Oh my goodness. So the Satanic Panic happens in what I like to think of as the long 1980s, both because it's accurate and because it really bothers my historian friends. So the book that I focus on gets published in 1980. And let's see, the FBI releases its report saying, golly, we've looked for a long time and we can't find anything. In January of 1992, but we have a cultural and particularly a white feminist investment in this idea of ritual abuse that lingers for another couple of years and also hops the pond. So we see some of this in the UK, but it's roughly like 1980 to mid 1990s. And resource-wise, well, the best known satanic ritual abuse criminal investigation lasted almost a decade and was, at its height, the longest and most expensive criminal trial in U.S. history. The FBI spent almost $1 million trying to prove that some sort of global satanic conspiracy was attacking, again, mostly white women and children. Millions were donated to organizations like Believe the Children, and ultimately, we have no evidence that any sort of organized satanic effort to pervert and murder American children ever really existed. But people are still selling books about it, and, you know, QAnon brought it back. So, yeah.
We'll get to QAnon. So from what you said and what I've read in the book, we've got basically a kind of 12 or 13-year period of people really investigating sort of the idea of a satanic set of satanic rings around the country that are attacking women and children and other things. We'll get to that in a minute. We've got millions of dollars spent. We've got the FBI. If I'm not wrong, Oprah Winfrey and Geraldo Rivera are all,
Sally
hosting
Jesse.
people. Yes.
Absolutely. We'll get to this too, but Jesse Helms did get the entire U.S. Senate to agree not to give tax breaks to anyone who served the forces of evil in the year of someone's Lord, 1985.
Nice. Wow. Yeah. Okay. The forces
very colorful.
Of evil.
Yeah. Or witches, forces of darkness. Yeah, it's a whole thing, but it's in the congressional record. Democracy is neat and it definitely works.
Anyway. Yes. Good. Okay. We're going to, there's so many ways on a day where I'm really, really exhausted that we could go with what you just said. We're going to resist that. And we're going to say this. What is now the satanic? So there's folks out there that are like, okay, so this thing lasted 13 years, 12 years, millions of dollars, Oprah Winfrey, the FBI. What were they investigating?
Well, so it's not religious Satanism, importantly. The Church of Satan gets its start in what's now the United States in 1966. We see an offshoot in the 70s with the Temple of Set. But that's not what people are freaking out about in the 1980s and the 1990s. There is this idea that Satanists, who are poorly defined but clearly work for the devil, the Christian devil, it should be emphasized, have infiltrated American society at every conceivable level, from daycares to elected government, from law enforcement to just truly any important institution you could think of. We are to believe has been infiltrated by Satanists who want to destroy America. They want to do it in very specifically anti-Christian terms and anti-white conservative Christian terms. And they are coming for our kids. So we should be very afraid of things like daycare, which white American women are putting their kids in for the first time in U.S. history, because Reaganomics means that white women are having to work outside the home for the first time in U.S. history. Obviously, women of color have always worked outside the home. We have there's just so much. We have mental health care professionals, social workers, law enforcement officers, all looking for Satan and how this global conspiracy to sexually and spiritually attack mostly white American children and then later white American women is just infused throughout our entire culture, which is one of those things that, like, I say it out loud and I lived through it. I remember it happening, and it's still hard to believe. And a lot of folks don't even know that it happened. We kind of, American religious history until fairly recently has just sort of not talked about it. Yeah. And until QAnon started talking about, Democratic pedophile rings running through pizza places, the idea of a satanic panic had kind of faded from at least mainstream American consciousness.
So one of the things that is so amazing about this story is how this all sort of starts. And, and I know you don't want to sort of give away everything that's in the book, but would you give us a little bit of so Megan, there must be some legitimate reason that millions of dollars and Oprah Winfrey and social workers and daycares and police unions and everyone else was just uncovering every stone for these Illuminati Satanists who, are out to wreck the nation and destroy children and commit violence against women. I mean, there must be a good reason for this. Am I right?
Yeah,
am I wrong?
We hate it. Yeah, no, absolutely. No. There is a good reason. We hate it when sex abuse is our fault. We like to find monsters to blame for that. So, okay, what happened? So child abuse starts being part of a national discourse in the 1960s, but the focus there is almost exclusively on physical abuse. So child beating, child battering. 1970s, particularly toward the late 1970s, there's a lot of attention about and some federal resources directed toward the prevention of child sexual abuse specifically. That conversation is almost exclusively driven by feminist activists who are survivors themselves. The focus is largely on incest, and it is a deeply unsettling conversation for most Americans because the folks who are providing very compelling evidence of how common child sex abuse is are saying that the folks abusing our kids are folks who love and have access to our kids. So spouses, family members, trusted community members. And that makes us feel, I think Rhiannon Graybill would say, icky. We don't like that. In 1980, we get this book called Michelle Remembers that is a story of one woman's recovering memories of having survived satanic ritual abuse in her youth. She recovers these memories, and you should hear recovers in scare quotes because that's not actually how memory works. Recovers these memories under the direction of her then psychiatrist, later spouse, Lawrence Pazder. And they publish this. They call it it's published as nonfiction. This is a good time to remind listeners that nonfiction, by and large, is not fact-checked. The story of what supposedly happened to her in her childhood, which is that she was abducted by a coven of witches, members of the Church of Satan, she says, which is why the Church of Satan then sues them later. And is physically abused, sexually abused, held captive for months and months, and finally escapes with the help of literal material manifestation of the Virgin Mary. And again, I want to underline that this gets published as nonfiction, and that it's published under the imprimatur of the Bishop of the British Columbia, Remy DeBrew. So it's not just published by a major publishing house, it is also published with kind of a stamp of approval from the Roman Catholic Church in North America. But like one book wouldn't do this. What happened is that the authors of this book then went on tour, and they didn't just do a book tour, although they toured their asses off. They also had seminars and public presentations with things like the American Psychiatric Association and law enforcement and social work, and presented basically a checklist of what to look for if you think there's some sort of satanic activity in the crime that you're investigating, or this custody case, or a woman's troubled past. And so we see the emergence of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these satanic ritual abuse allegations pop up in violent crime investigations, in criminal investigations, particularly of daycares, and of diagnoses of largely white, affluent women who are going to therapy saying something doesn't feel right and are being told what actually happened was satanic ritual abuse. And then they're encouraged to recover memories that look an awful lot like Michelle's. Or in the legal investigations, you have testimony over and over and over again that sounds very, very similar. And for folks addressing skepticism of satanic ritual abuse at the time, their response was always, well, everybody's telling the same story. How could people all over the country be making this up? And the answer is because they all are reading from the same script. Like either they've been in actual sessions with Pazder and Smith, or they're looking at lists that are compiled based on Michelle Remembers, and they're disseminating, mimeographed handouts. This is the very 80s. So mimeographed handouts, cassettes that are being dubbed and passed around so that people can listen and learn. And so everyone's, again, just operating off the same script. And so you have a ton of particularly coerced testimony from children, all saying the same things about how Satan abused them through their daycare, or often like elected officials or local religious authorities, stuff like that. It's a big old mess.
Well, and one of the things you said, I think is just so insightful, is that, you have a situation where there's starting to be data and evidence that, abuse in many forms is taking place in and through folks' loved ones, right? People who are not only loved ones, but are probably upstanding members of the neighborhood, and maybe in authority somehow, whether that's religiously or professionally or politically. And so this whole satanic panic is just an incredible vehicle for, as you said, inventing a monster and trying to sort of pin all of the ills and woes of society on it in order to take the spotlight away from the kind of systematic abuse that's happening in families, happening in religious settings, and so on and so forth.
Exactly. So even if you are being abused by your dad, the devil made him do it. The culpability is with this monstrous outsider rather than folks that we know and care about, because it's a lot more comfortable to blame Satan than to know that the people who prey on our kids are people that we know and love and trust, and who are folks that we know to be good people in other contexts.
Mm-hmm.
We are much more comfortable with abusers just being one-dimensional demons, literally and figuratively, than with people being complicated and sometimes people we love doing really horrible, arguably unforgivable things.
One of the things you argue in the chapter is that it makes sense for this to sort of take off at this point in American political and religious history. And I just love the historical research you have about Ronald Reagan giving his famous evil empire speech. But in that evil empire speech is really this talk of demons and spiritual woes in ways that really fit in with everything you just talked about. And I just think that part is really fascinating.
Thank you. This dovetails with the Catholicization of public morality conversation that we had last time. But what we're seeing at that moment of Reagan and the consolidation of the new Christian right and the moral majority is a collapsing of a Christian worldview and American political identity, so that the enemies of America are God's enemies, and anyone who would oppose us is obviously evil and on the side of the forces of darkness. So it's a very Christian way of seeing the world. I've argued, a very Catholic way of seeing the world, but it doesn't get presented as a religious worldview. It gets presented as a political and a cultural worldview, which is fascinating to me.
Well, and he's talking about evil empire. 1985 in Congress, we have the evil forces rhetoric.
Okay, but here's one of those spaces of like, it's so hard in like media studies and communication studies to trace impact, right? Usually. What's really fun and disturbing about this case study is that you can really draw lines. Jesse Helms watched an episode of 2020 about satanic ritual abuse. He enters the entire transcript of the episode into the congressional record as part of this moment. Like, you can draw a direct line. It's fascinating. And again, it's not just that Jesse Helms believed in Satan and believed in Satan so much that he brought this to the floor of Congress. The entire Congress of the United States of America, arguably the most powerful political body in the world at that moment, said, yeah, you're right. We definitely shouldn't fund Satan, who tacitly we've just all agreed is real, I guess.
Well, and this is the era where some folks may not remember the Satanic Panic, but many people will know the jokes about like, hey, if you listen to that rock album backwards, there's satanic messages in it, or if you use a Ouija board or whatever. I mean, to me,
Dungeons and Dragons being like a portal to another dimension that is definitely going to be demonic. And I have to tell you, I was very disappointed when I finally played D&D my senior year of high school and realized that like it's a lot more about Mountain Dew than it is about Satan. Just
too much Mountain Dew.
So much Mountain Dew and Cheetos, and like not one demon.
Where's the
not
devil?
One demon. I know, right?
I mean, I definitely sat in church meetings in my evangelical days where we were told that, Harry Potter, as you read Harry Potter, the series, it got more and more demonic and more disturbing, and we shouldn't let our kids
J.K. Rowling
around
definitely
that.
did. Sorry.
Well, yes, that's it's amazing what the afterlives of Harry Potter and how the things really, the evil forces really did take shape. But all of that to say, that to me, that was like the mid to late 90s. That was a holdover of a lot of what you're talking about here.
This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Football is back, and the best bet you can make is downloading the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It doesn't matter if you're new to gambling or an old pro, FanDuel has something for everyone. And as an official sports betting partner of the NFL, you know your bets are safe. There's also never been a better time to use FanDuel, because right now, you'll get up to $1,000 back if your first bet doesn't win. You can even turn a small wager into a big payday with a same-game parlay bet. Just sign up with the promo code Spotify to place your first bet risk-free on FanDuel Sportsbook. Download FanDuel today. 21 plus and present in Virginia. First online real money wager only. Refund issued as non-withdrawable site credit that expires in 14 days. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
So 2 more things. One is, what are the mechanics of this? So we've talked about how this is a nice way to take the spotlight off the realities of abuse and put them on a sort of mythical phenomenon that is, as you say, one-dimensional. Throughout your book, you argue that minority religions, religious minorities, racial minorities, and others are often just investigated and scrutinized obsessively, usually without warrant, on the basis of sex crimes, sex abuse, sexual violence. Do those things connect here? Is there a way that, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, they do. But it's not as direct as like tanks being sent in to police the fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. What happens instead is a collapsing of the American religious landscape into real religion, which is Christianity, and everything else. So there's less space for benign religious difference. If you are not actively aligned with America, the way that it has articulated itself in these very white Christian nationalist terms, then clearly Satan. The most, those are the options. It's the 80s. The most clearly affected folks are folks who are identifying specifically as witches or as Satanists. The leader and the founder of the Temple of Set, Michael Aquino, was investigated. There were reports of like children's corpses under his house. Nothing ever came of it, but like people's lives were ruined. Folks did millennia of combined sentences for satanic ritual abuse crimes. We've got folks that just got out of prison in the last 10 to 15 years over something that happened while I was in high school, which is longer ago than I'd like to say. And it's just, there's still 2 states in the US that have SRA, satanic ritual abuse related laws on the books. Like this is still very much active in our political landscape. So
it's disturbing.
It is very disturbing. And I think it was important, any of the times that I've talked about this in public, that we resist the urge to just be like, gosh, that's weird. Because folks who either were themselves pagan, Wiccan, whatever, were harmed by this. And the space for there just to be more kinds of ways of being religious in the US was really harmed by this panic.
Yeah. I don't know why, but and I didn't plan on saying this, but as you're talking, I cannot get the movie Top Gun out of my head because it comes from 1986, 87, and just that like balls to the wall patriotism in these sort of like ultra, hot bodies of Tom Cruise and Val Kilmer. And as you said, it's like America or Satan. Like the enemies in that movie are always just these sort of fighter pilots in black jets that are opposed to the United States. We don't actually know who they are or what they want. It's just they're just the dark others who must be defeated at all cost. And anyway,
well, and that's a conversation, right? It's always godless communists, but it's not just an absence of religious belonging. It's an active alliance with the forces of Satan or the forces of darkness.
Yeah.
Which does get coded as black, which is a whole nother level of white supremacy, obviously.
Oh, no, for sure. The racial elements here are clear. So before we wrap up, we really do have to bring this into the present with QAnon. And you said that QAnon brought it back. But I mean, the resonances, I think, to anybody listening have to be clear by now. The emphasis in QAnon on, the liberals and the political enemies are literal demons. They eat children, they abuse children. It's a global cabal of pedophiles and so on. It really does sound like Satanic Panic 2.0. Is that inaccurate? Are there things to nuance there?
I don't even think I think 2.0 is a good way to think about it because it's not a whole new project. It's just an update. There are direct lines that you can draw from the kind of not just the kind of rhetoric that gets used by QAnon, because all of that is ancient. It's as old, at least, as Christianity, because early Christians were accused of, sexually defiling and eating children. And we see this deployed against any number of religious outsiders throughout recorded history. But in the case of the Satanic Panic, and then jumping forward to QAnon, this gets traced through like evangelical spaces of never believing that the Satanic Panic really ended, that people just decided it wasn't important anymore, but real believers knew the truth. So the shift through like the markets for spiritual warfare definitely helped drive some of this. But also, I mean, QAnon isn't, and I'm sure folks know this, like religiously singular movement, right? But it definitely plays on American assumptions about what happens when people are evil. And the idea of that evil gets articulated in very conservative white Christian ways.
Yeah.
So it picks up on all of this. Well, if the Democrats are bad, then they're not just bad, they're super bad, they're demonic. What do demonic folks do? Well, they prey on babies, right?
Yeah.
And there is a whole illusion of, well, if they support contraceptive and reproductive justice, then they must also love killing children and doing horrible sex things to them as well. And there's a strong tension there, obviously, between the professed concern about kids in QAnon spaces or like Operation Underground Railroad spaces, and the realities of how we as a country and how Q's supposed leader, the 45th president of the United States, actually treated child sex traffickers, because he was pretty good buddies with a lot of them. And also charges for sex trafficking went way down during the 45th presidency. It's also important to note that like sex trafficking is not the most common form of trafficking, and most attempts legally that we've seen to curtail sex trafficking do more to harm sex workers than anything to actually save sexually exploited people. And one of the truly unfortunate things that we've seen with things like Q or any of these rescue operations is they actually contribute to creating a global market for child sex trafficking that was not there to begin with. Melissa Gira Grant is doing some really great reporting on this for the New Republic. Highly recommended. Folks should check it out. Anyway, it's bad and it's not new, but it still sucks.
Can I just ask one more follow-up? And it occurred to me when you were speaking there about contraception, and we obviously talked about contraceptive nationalism last time, but I wonder if, in the 1980s, we really have a situation where in the late 70s and then into the 80s, Protestants and evangelicals in particular really get on the anti-abortion train. It had been a Catholic issue throughout this, the mid-century, 50s, 60s, early 70s.
Yep.
I'm just wondering, I'm thinking about the 80s and abortion and the Satanic Panic. I'm also thinking about debates between Hillary Clinton and the eventual 45th president, where, the accusations are that Hillary Clinton supports, mythical kinds of abortions at the very end of a pregnancy that are essentially baby killing and these kinds of things
that don't exist.
Is there a link between this particular kind of monster that we see mythologized in the Satanic Panic and maybe in QAnon and the expansion of reproductive rights and the discourse surrounding abortion and other topics?
Yeah, I mean, and again, this is a very Catholic space for me because we have folks like Jerry Falwell coming out and saying, gosh, we had gotten this wrong. We need to be taking a page from the Catholics. We do actually have to care about contraception and abortion, which only intensifies through the 1980s and into the early aughts, where truly the way that the U.S. legally thinks about contraception and abortion has become so very Catholic and so very blurred. I haven't seen any specific, like, you all do abortions, so you must also kill and rape babies.
Yeah.
But it's very easy to see that specter sort of looming, particularly in the spectacle of QAnon and the spectacle of attempts to save the children.
Yeah.
And I feel pretty sure that you've got folks who are showing up both for anti-choice rallies and for these Save the Kids places. But the difference is that a lot of the Save the Kids activism is directly tied to QAnon in a way that reproductive anti-choice movements have not historically been. So particularly like nice white ladies who get sucked into these Save the Kids campaigns on Facebook show up for these rallies not knowing often anything about QAnon. And by the end of the rally, they're chanting, "Where we go one, where we go all." It's fascinating and horrifying. And the path to radicalization has just become so very short.
Yeah.
So.
Before we close, I just have to get this in. You talked about Jesse Helms introducing the entire transcript of an episode on Satan and satanic rituals into the congressional record. And so we have a situation in 1985 where a leader in our country, a member of Congress, is watching television and is like, wow, no one else knows about this. I need to take this to Congress. And it really does portend the 45th president watching Fox News and then tweeting about things and introducing policies and ideas that he just got directly from Fox News. I mean, it shows you that the 45th presidency was in many ways an apotheosis of things that had been brewing for half a century rather than some sort of radical aberration.
Very, very much so. And I think it's really important that we say that again and slower. 45 didn't come out of nowhere, and 45 was predictable if we pay attention to what's happening in the last 50 years of American politics. You can, again, draw a straight line from him, not just to the Satanic Panic, but what's going on in the 1970s. The racism and the attempts to quash reproductive justice and so much else has really been brewing for quite some time. So he really is, as is QAnon, the logical, if absurd, conclusion of everything that we've been working on for the last 50 years.
Yeah. Well, that's a very cheerful way to end our discussion. And so, I mean, first of all, Dr. Goodwin, thank you again for just sharing your insight. I cannot encourage people enough to buy the book. Would you mind telling us one more time where folks might find you if they'd like to link up with what you're up to?
Sure. The short answer is Twitter. Always Twitter. Too much Twitter, really. My handle is MP, as in Patricia G, PhD. I also have a website, megan-goodwin.com. Megan is just Megan, but really it's just find me on Twitter. It's easier. And there's a lot of really interesting yelling about Satan and any number of other things.
Are there, I'm putting you on the spot here, are there plans in the works for the next season of Keeping It 101?
There are, actually. We're really excited. And Lisa's in the middle. Elise Morgenstein, of course, my co-host at UVM, is in the middle of doing a lot of scripting right now. So our next seasons are conversations about the world religions paradigm and how we hate it, but also everybody has to teach this class. So we are doing both some kind of theoretical overview stuff that builds on conversations from our first season, but also tradition-specific looks into what it is to be religious in the world. So we're really excited about it. And we've got a bunch of folks who are experts in these traditions, since we are mostly not experts in a lot of these traditions, coming in to chat with us as well.
If you want to get a scholar of religion who knows their stuff riled up, just talk to them about world religions, and you will regret it. Anyway, I'll leave that there. Dr. Megan Goodwin, thank you so much for being here. As always, friends, you can find us at Straight White JC on Twitter, on Instagram, and on TikTok. And you can find me at Bradley Onishi. We can always use your support on PayPal and Patreon. That's at straightwhiteamericanjesus.com. And we'll be back with the weekly roundup later this week. But for now, thanks for being here, and we'll catch you next time.
This has been an Irreverent Media podcast.
Hey, it's your friend Josie here from the Speaking in Church podcast, where we talk all things deconstruction, pop culture, and, well, Jesus. You're currently listening to an Irreverent podcast, and guess what? We're an Irreverent podcast too. So tune in to the Speaking in Church podcast, where we talk to regular people about regular things that regularly happen to us in the evangelical church, and we bitch about it. Join us. If you want to come on, you can always let us know.